Most buyers agents and spruikers, they don't understand commercial, so they push residential and they talk about passive income and how property is going to release you from the 9 to 5. It's near impossible with interest rates at the moment where they're at.
Steve Palise is a commercial buyer's agent specifically. He's written 2 books, but we're not here to talk about the books today.
But the biggest thing I found was I hated the corporate stuff. I always knew being there was something just wasn't right. I wanted to work for myself. That was the first moment. I was like, stuff this, getting out of this, joined a really small buyer's agency that bought residential properties. Was planning to just do it for a year, just kind of bite my teeth into a little bit. And then 8 years later and 2,000 acquisitions under my belt.
What would you say is a good asset for a first commercial property?
Similar to residential, you want to have a good base, a low risk base. The lowest risk ones at the moment is in.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you tune in from. We're sitting here with Steve Palise. Steve Palise is a buyer's agent for commercial buyer's agents specifically. And he's written 2 books, residential property investing and commercial property investing. But we're not here to talk about the books today. We'll talk about more of your vulnerability and personal life mostly, yeah? You mentioned before as well, you started off in UTS studying robotics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What makes you, what was the shift?
Well, so I chose robotics because I was good at maths and without boasting, I got 99.5 in high school. So could have done medicine, actuary and stuff. And I was like, engineering sounds cool. I'll be a design engineer. Yeah. Not really knowing what it was. Did engineering, did really well at it. Got the university medal. Then went into designing robotic limbs and stuff like that. Yeah. Then realized it didn't pay that well and I wanted a different kind of quality of life. So then went into mining. So I'm actually a chartered structural and mechanical engineer now as well. So designing mine sites and stuff like that. But then I started buying property. So to increase my wealth, I was following a few of the young gurus at the time that had 20, 30 plus portfolios, kind of sitting there going, why am I working 50-hour weeks for kind of $100,000 a year? And then bought my first one and timed it luckily perfectly. So I bought in 2012, I bought a little house in Western Sydney for $230,000 that went to 300, 320 in the first year. And I was kind of at work being like, have I just made 5 years worth of savings from just buying a property, signing a piece of paper and doing nothing? And then went down the rabbit hole of I'm just going to keep doing this. And then, 1 became 2, 2 became 4. I think when I left engineering, I think I had about 9 properties when I left.
Wow.
But the biggest thing I found was this is part of the podcast, the fuck it moment was, I hated the corporate stuff. I always knew being there that there was something just wasn't right. I wanted to work for myself or I just hated the bullshit politics.
Yeah.
Even one of my friends, so good guy, sat next to me, same role. He left the company, got a different job to pay more, didn't like the new job and then came back and they gave him a pay rise because he had more experience. And then I'm sitting there why am I freaking having loyalty to this company when they're rewarding you for leaving? And then there was that. And then the guys next to you that always get the boss's roles and things like that, they're always the ones that probably don't deserve it. And then that was the first fuck it moment. I was stuff this, getting out of this, joined a really small buyer's agency that bought residential properties. Yep. Was planning to just do it for a year, just kind of bite my teeth into a little bit. And then, now we're 8 years later and 2,000 acquisitions under my belt.
Sounds like you've got a few fucking moments during your
career. There's a few.
We'll talk about that later. So with the first property that you bought, that was back in 2012 and that was for $230,000. What was it? Was it
just a little townhouse. So a little townhouse in Blacktown, which is in Western Sydney.
Yeah.
There's nothing special about it. It's just fairly low socioeconomic, but it's all I could afford at the time. So I had a 90% loan. So I think I put $24,000 or something into it to get it with the 10% deposit, LMI and stuff like that. And then, just perfect timing in the market kind of grew.
Where do you think was the biggest challenge in buying properties at the time, whether to get from the first to your second property or from the 5th to the 8th property?
Always saving the deposits was the hardest one. But I came from the era before APRA and the Royal Commission lending restrictions. It was a lot easier to get finance. Pretty much if you had the equity, you could kind of get into another one. And the banks were fairly loose with their valuations. You could kind of give you a bit of a higher valuation. So it was, to be honest, just the first one. After that, the next problem of every investor, and myself included, is serviceability. So what you earn versus, as you know, trying to actually get the loans for it. And then that's where income needs to go up. Luckily for me, as I kind of got like 9 properties, it sounds like a lot, but a lot of them are 200 to 400 grand properties. So it was like a few mil portfolio. So I hit the service of being, I think twice, where I had to kind of sit there for 6, 12 months. Then the step back was when I joined the buyer's agency. Didn't have any borrowing capacity because new industry, 50 grand a year, couldn't touch anything for a year. Luckily, the buyer's agency I joined, we grew really quickly. It was just me and the owner, and then now we're like 20 staff when I left, and salary kind of went up to 200, 300 pretty quick, and I could kind of go again. But then, starting my own business, same thing, back to the start, servicing issues, but it's a first world problem because I know I'm in a different kind of ether to most because I've kind of got a big portfolio and fair amount of equity as well.
In terms of your own business, is this the only business that you own or have ever owned?
Yep, first one, only one, and I've started it 3 years ago. Now I've got 18 staff.
3 years ago, so another COVID baby.
No, sort of. So this is probably another fuck it moment. At the time, the company I was with grew quite a lot, and it actually started feeling back to engineering days where it was corporate. And like everyone else, I was earning good money, but I wasn't enjoying it. Like waking up, I was like, I can't be bothered talking to David this morning kind of thing. It was just like a bit of a grind again. And I've always been saying for the last 10 years, I wish I could move overseas, live overseas, do all that. And my partner at the time actually called bullshit on it. She's like, let's go. And I'm like, what do you mean let's go? And then started making excuses. So as I mentioned before this podcast, my mum died last year of dementia. So she had a 10-year kind of battle with that. I was using that to hold back. So I was kind of she was probably 5 years into it then. It was like, oh, look, time's limited. I don't want to lose time with my mum. Yeah. But then how long do you wait? Do you sacrifice? You might have lived for another 5, 10 years. Do you just blank out that period or you go? So that was the fuck it moment. It was like, nah, let's go do it. Let's actually have a crack. Fly back a couple of times a year to see her kind of thing. Yeah. And then that was the kick up the bum to leave the other company. I had a bit of a passive income, not a huge one, but enough to survive. Went over to the UK and I was like, oh, cool, let's just do a year or two, live overseas. Then my business kind of just organically grew. So I had the commercial book out and I thought, if I do a deal every 3 months, it's enough to keep the lights on. You charge typically 15 grand or whatever it is. I'll do that. Then one property became 2 properties a month, then it became 3. Then I was hiring people remotely. I grew my business for the first 2 years overseas. And I think we had about 10 staff before I came back about a year ago.
In the hindsight, would you do anything differently?
No, I've always focused now on, it sounds selfish, me first. So making sure I'm enjoying life first. Obviously you want to look after the people around you, but you should never stay in a job that you don't like for that. The being overseas was actually probably the best thing for me. So because I was starting a business with the big time difference, I had to run it like a business. Whereas I think if I was in, say, Sydney, I would have met up in person quite a lot, did a lot of referrals, and I did those business networking events and doing all that type of stuff. By being over there, it's okay, I need to have a social media presence so I can get to more people that way. So it kind of pushed me down that route. The other one was because I started hiring staff, I needed a top level CRM and systems. So everything needed to be managed from afar so everyone can see everything. I don't actually actively have to do anything. So my systems and processes are flawless because I had to do it where everyone understands what's going on and the process without me actually being involved. So the best thing was it actually forced me to treat it like a business and hire people before I would have hired people if I was available from 9 till 5 in Sydney. So it was actually probably the best thing for my business long term. Hard at the start, first 6 months, it's waking up at 3 a.m. for sales calls and working till 7 p.m. at night. But then once all the systems are coming up, I'm basically out of the business if I want, which is quite nice.
Yeah, so a short-term struggle for a long-term gain.
Yeah.
Would you call it an artificial hardship that you created for yourself?
No, because it's a privileged hardship.
A privileged hardship?
Well, I've been very lucky in property and health and wealth that I'm not going to complain about it. So I've introduced it for the sake of having a fun couple years. What happened concurrently though is I had the best of both worlds. I got to work hard, have a really successful business and be overseas. And I worked from 15 countries. And even now we still travel a lot. A month ago, we got back from a few weeks in Japan, driving a camper van around there. So I want that to keep going. So
I reckon that is a dream for a lot of entrepreneurs, is to own their own business, can run it from anywhere around the world, travel, just do whatever you want to do, and still enjoy it and run a very successful company. Yeah. How do you do it?
I'm one of those lucky industries where I don't have to be physically present. So because I've got people on the ground, like when we buy a property, we've got inspectors, I've got buyer's agents on the ground, you've got like valuers, like you can send all the necessary people to look at it. If I was a real estate agent, no chance. Like it's still traditional. You got to open the doors on Saturday and things like that. If you get it to the point where you've got a team who does that, of course you can manage from afar. Like we could do this podcast from afar, and I did lots of podcasts overseas. So I'm just privileged that I don't have to be on a hands-on type job.
Yeah.
If I'm a chippy, a labourer or something like that, you're working remotely with your hands, but everything by me is desktop, which is quite nice.
But in the early days, for most businesses, the owner is the brand of the business. Especially if you put your name on your business. How do you build credibility if you're not physically present here?
I actually thought being overseas, I wouldn't have as many clients come in because they wouldn't want to work with someone overseas. What I actually found in reality, it actually attracted different types of clients because people would call me being like, Steve, I want what you have. Because I didn't hide it. Like I was all over social media of like, I'm in Italy this weekend, Greece this weekend. They're actually like, I want your life. I don't want the buyer's agent who's sitting by a desk working 12 hours a day saying he's got financial freedom. So it actually brought me a different clientele. And like we spoke before about like authenticity, it actually made me authentic how I was. So it didn't really affect that. My branding and trust from clients also comes from the amount of content I give out. Like I've got 2 books. I've got like 10,000 videos on social media now. I've just done a commercial course that's free. So there's like 15 hours there, me talking. So by the time they even reach out to me, they trust what I'm about because they know what I'm about. Like if a client calls me up and says, oh, Steve, I read your book and did your course, they've watched me and listened to me or read me for 20 plus hours. Like I don't have to sell anymore. Now they know who I am. They know what I'm about. They know my principles were in investing. It's cool. Tell me about you. Tell me what you're trying to achieve, David. What time frame do you want to do it in? And like, what do we have to finance? And then we kind of work that together. So I don't really have to sell per se. My selling is exposure of giving out free information.
Yeah, so basically you've given out massive value already before anyone reached you.
So I don't have to like sponsor ads that much. Like I put a few grand a month into some ads, whereas other companies that don't have books and podcast series and courses, they rely on ad spend. It's all marketing. So it's all the showy, oh, look what I can do for you. They make up stuff like, here's the Goldilocks formula that's going to make you rich. I'm very engineering. Here's the facts. Here's what I'm about. If you like my stuff, reach out.
Yeah. But when it comes to time or speed to get to your to target to your goals, do you find that work better for you?
With regards to what goals? Business goals or personal?
Business goals.
To be honest, I've never actually had a goal with business.
Wow.
That was the thing. So I'm a bit different. I know a lot of like business owners are very driven of like, I want to be worth this. I want to be a billionaire. I want to scale grow at this rate. I'll be honest, my business, all I care about, as long as my bank account goes up each month, I don't care whether it's 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, because I know I've got a portfolio behind me. So I've always just tried to just do value. And yes, of course it's nice to kind of grow, but I've never made that the focus. The focus probably for me is exposure. Like as long as I can keep pushing my exposure, I know the more of my stuff that's out there, it'll kind of come back to me long term. But like I don't know where I want to be. If you asked me 7 years ago, would I be running a buyer's agent and have 2 books in stores? I would have no idea. And that's part of it. Like my income's gone up. I went through a divorce and then it went down. Then you start a business. Now I've got a 12-month-old. Goals change as well. All of a sudden, 12-hour days are shifted into 6-hour days. Like, I'm a bit of a pessimist. My partner actually hates me. So whenever we're talking about like life problems, I'm like, oh, we're just a rock floating around the sun. What are you worried about? And she hates that, but that's just my attitude.
So you're pretty bad at planning, but you're very good in organizing.
Yeah, I'd say that. So not planning. If I've got a goal, I'm very good at planning, very engineering like, and this is what my team actually say. They're like, whenever you do something, you do it well. You never half-ass it. It's always like, if this is a new system we're introducing, I will stress test it to the lines. Like I know exactly where it's at. But that's the old engineering mindset of like when I used to be a structural engineer, you can't half-ass anything. Like if it's going to fall down, you're going to kill people. So I kind of do that. But in regards to like, I don't have the typical like, I don't turn up to Tony Robbins and I wish I'm a billionaire. I just want to keep having fun. Like I said at the start, it's just selfish. I just want to me first, and then make sure the people in my bubble are also having a good time.
Attainable goals. So just keep being better than your previous self every day.
Yeah, and there's one of my favorite quotes is there's two ways to be wealthy. One's to earn more money. The other one's to lower your expectations.
I like that. Now let's talk about residential versus commercial property investing. You mentioned a lot in your contents as well. I've watched a lot of your contents. You're a big advocate for commercial property investing. Why is that, and what's the pros and cons?
Yep. All right. So most buyers agents and spruikers, they don't understand commercial, so they push residential and they talk about passive income and how like property is going to release you from the 9 to 5. It's near impossible with interest rates at the moment where they're at. Like most capital cities are neutral to negatively geared, 20, 30, 40 grand a year per property. So if you're trying to talk about leaving the workforce, you can't do that with neutral and negatively geared properties. Like all of a sudden it becomes like a 15 to 30 year goal, which is fine. It's a very low risk way of doing it, but commercial's got 3 times the income. So anything you can do in residential, I can do with a commercial property in a third the time. So me talking about like $100,000 passive incomes in 10 years is very doable. Like some of the numbers, like you go buy $1 million commercial and it's a 6.5% net yield. If you put the cash flow from that property back into the debt, within about 11, 12 years, it's paid off. And that's with high interest rates now. And you're left with like, let's say 3% rental increases. It's like an 85 grand passive income.
Yeah.
Like residential, to get 85 passive income, you need like 350 grand worth of rent roll by the time you pay council rates, water rates, maintenance. And then just to get that is quite difficult. Then there's a longer time frame to obviously pay down the debt as well. So commercial is a game changer if you actively want to get out or build a passive income quickly. Don't want to sugarcoat it though. There's way more risks and moving parts.
Yep.
Like anything you need to worry about in residential, you have to worry about plus more. There's foot traffic, road traffic, competition analysis, analysing leases, looking at what new stocks coming on the market. You've got to do credit history checks on the tenant. Like even studying the vacancy is a really difficult project. That's like 2-3 hours of work there. Like just analysing one commercial, we spend around 20 to 30 hours per commercial on due diligence. Resi, check flood zones, do a building pest inspection, some high-level macros of the area. Long term, you're going to be okay. Next 20 years, you'll survive. As long as you can handle interest rate fluctuations, you'll be right. Commercial, there's a lot more at stake. If you lose a tenant and there's a long vacancy period, having zero income on $1 million or $2 million is a lot harder to swallow.
Yep, and that's where you can really add value.
Yeah, that's where most people come. Most people use something like a buyer's agent service like mine. Sometimes it's to get like the spooky side of it, like off-market deals. So like 50-60% of what we get's off-market. So we can actually show them. But most people we're a bit of an insurance policy. So because now I've got 2,000 acquisitions under my belt, I can basically make sure you're not going to make a mistake because I know the processes and know what to look out for. So some people use this for that. Other people use this for time saving because it is like we'll spend hundreds of hours looking for a client and then 20 to 40 hours doing due diligence. White collar professionals and busy individuals, they don't have that time. They don't want to spend every night looking on real commercial. Yeah. So it saves time as well. So everyone's got a different reason to use it, but I find most just want to make sure they don't make a mistake, especially if it's their first few.
So for a first time investor, especially for commercial property investor, what would you say is a good asset for a first commercial property purchase?
Yep. So similar to residential, you want to build a good base, a low risk base. So where someone will say, don't go buy a high density off the plan apartment in a mining town, you don't do stuff like that. So the lowest risk ones at the moment is industrial. Mm-hmm. Vacancy rates in every capital city were sub 0.8%.
Wow.
So I used to talk about sub 5% being a tight vacancy rate. Yeah. Now in capital city, we're talking like some of the areas I buy, we're talking literally close to a 0% vacancy rate. There's zero available stock. So industrial, it's lowest risk in regards to vacancy. They're also the most versatile because like it's just 3 concrete tilt-up panels and a roller door. But the reason I try to get some first-time investors into it is it's easy to have like-for-like comparison. You can look at, like, say I'm going to buy you a body corporate industrial warehouse in Sydney or Brisbane or wherever it is. I can say, this is what every other warehouse in the complex sold for per square metre. Then I can find another complex, I don't know, a kilometre away and say, this is what these ones sold for per square metre. Then these ones went vacant, how long were they vacant for? And if they come back at 1 month and 2 months and 7 days and 14 days, you start making decisions off the numbers.
Yeah.
Whereas something like a retail, even I personally love retail. Literally last week bought a whole shopping centre for 3.1 mil in Brisbane with 8 tenants. That's so much more moving parts because just understanding like vacancy is really difficult. Like if say the little shopping centre I bought, it's 8 tenants and one of the tenants leave, how do you analyse how long it's going to be vacant for? Because you can maybe go to one of the other shops that 7 years ago went vacant and how long was that vacant for? You can maybe go find a similar shopping centre in another suburb and see how long they went vacant for. But what was the foot traffic on those ones? What was the exposure? Where were they located in regards to the car spots and stuff like that? So there's a lot more moving parts. So it's a harder to get your head around. Then you got to do competition analysis and foot and road traffic analysis. So there's another layer of complexity there.
Yeah.
But industrial, it's 3 concrete tilt-up panels, roller door, just looking at square metre rates. We tabulate out like 20 comparisons and just say, look, this is what you're looking at. This is the vacancy. This is the sale prices. This is where you're at, and you're at least making an informed decision.
In your opinion, or in your market research, do you see a lot more industrial warehouses coming up, new builds?
Yes, but like residential, it just depends where they are. So you can always buy the high risk ones that are like off the plan in the new estates, and there's a positive and negative of those, obviously. Like normally, what happens to grow an area? So like with residential, people always talk about like, oh, you want infrastructure spending. Like the only way to build infrastructure is to have infrastructure set up to be able to do that. So part of that is like you might have a regional town. They go, okay, we want to increase our population by 40% by 2035. The first thing they build is industrial warehouses because to be able to build roads and retail shops, they need industrial because that's what houses the supplies and the fabricators and all that type of stuff. But the vacancy is higher at the start because the people aren't there. It's just based on the building of it. Then as the people come in, they build the residential houses, vacancy rates are high. They move in, vacancy rates start dropping. And then the need for industrial goes up again because they need the panel beaters, the spray painters, the electricians. So they come in ebbs and cycles. So they're higher risk because it's harder to get vacancy analysis, but you can still buy a good long-term one. To answer your question before, I wouldn't buy something like that for a first-time investor because there's too many kind of risks involved. I would buy them an industrial one in a well-encapsulated area surrounded by residential. And if that residential area is like, say they're building up, so they're changing the zoning from 1 story to 5 stories, population's growing by 20, 30%, how is that property going to be in less demand if there's 20, 30% more people in the next 5, 10 years? So that's a lower risk one than thing. Same thing with residential, buying off the plan on the outskirts of Sydney or Melbourne or things like that. There's different risks involved. You can still do well if you know what you're doing, but most people don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. So the challenge now with residential property investment is the borrowing capacity, which is reduced massively. With commercial property investment, it's quite different. What do you see is the biggest challenge at the moment?
So that's actually a driver why I'm getting obviously growing business and getting more clients is they're capped out with residential. And then as you know, commercial lending is a bit of a different game. Yep. So you've still got your full doc, then you've got your low doc, but lease doc loans and things like that are coming through as well. So a lot of people, like household liquidity at the moment is all-time high. So people have all this money locked up in assets. By pulling that out and putting it into commercial, which generally rents for 2 to 3 times residential, where you're capped out in servicing for residential means you can potentially squeeze into commercial. So that's been a big driver to the commercial market as well. The other one's education. Like mine was the first book on the market. Now there's 4 or 5 books. There's 10 other podcasters out there. There's magazines. There's quite a bit more knowledge. So that's pushing more people to the market. But like things like lease stock loans is a bit of a game changer for some if they've got the deposit.
What was your most successful investment?
First one because it got me into it. But if I'm honest, like the boring assets I've bought, like the simple warehouses, or I even bought like a little coffee shop next to a train station in Ipswich. That was like 430 grand and it rented for like 32 grand at the time.
Hang on, so a coffee shop, so 430 grand including the business?
No, so the business, there's the tenant. So you're buying the building. So it was a freestanding building next to Ipswich, which is in Brisbane. Yep. So Queensland Ipswich, next to the train station with 10 car spots, and it was just a coffee shop. I bought that. That got valued at like 850. What's that? 5 years later, done nothing to it. It's just actually, I should say, the tenant actually renovated the building for free because he wanted to make it look nicer. And he's like, "Oh, do you mind if I renovate the building?" I'm like, sure, increase the value of the building. So that's part of the commercial game. Other ones are just like warehouses that have kind of grown by 50% in the last kind of 3-4 years.
Yep.
But every one's just important. The ones I probably focus on are probably the worst investments. The ones where you're like, oh, I probably could have done better there.
What do they look like?
Probably I chased cash flow too early on in my portfolio. So where I was like, this is probably a good one. My best and my worst purchase was I bought a 1-bedroom apartment in Cairns, Queensland.
In Cairns.
Yep, $30,000.
Wow.
Yep.
When was that?
2014.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very rundown, low socioeconomic. Banks wouldn't lend to it though because it was under the square meter size, but it rented for $160 a week. So I bought a car at the time. I had like a 25 grand car, and I looked at the car and I'm like, see a car, you're going like, I'm better off buying this, using the rent to pay repayments on a car.
Yeah.
The reason why that was my worst purchase is because I couldn't lend to it. So it ended up costing me like 35 grand by the time I did a little renovation, stamp duty, legals, all that type of stuff. 35 grand into it. Even though it was giving me cash flow, I missed out on the most important part of property, leverage.
Mm-hmm.
So I've put all my cash, it was property number 3 in my portfolio. I should have got another 90% loan or something like that and bought a $300,000, $350,000 house, which would now be worth $750,000, $800,000. Whereas that one I sold a few years ago for $80,000. So not a bad like physical ROI, but a terrible leveraged ROI. So I chased the cash flow and I bought like a little townhouse in Foster, which is like east coast of like 3 hours north of Sydney, 112 grand that rented for 220, stuff like that, where it made good cash flow sense, but didn't have the same capital growth fundamentals. So I was one of those people who's like, I'm going to buy cash flow. And it worked all right, and it kind of gave me a bit of confidence when I actually left engineering because I had about a $50,000 passive income at the time because interest rates were quite low. But I should have went for the neutral one. Like I wasn't living the life on 50 grand a year kind of thing. Like it didn't actually change my life. I would have been better with buying some better blue chip capital growth assets that grew an extra 50 grand a year. So like I haven't made any bad, like terrible ones, but I just could have done better.
Yeah. So each person would have a different strategy when it comes to, procuring their portfolio.
It just depends where you're at. Like, so the questions I said to you before, like what are you trying to achieve and what time frame are you doing it in and what do you have to work with finance?
Yeah.
Everyone's different on that. If you're 20 years old, why would you buy commercial when you've got to put a 20-30% deposit in? Like if you've got bank of mum and dad for guarantors and things like that, go leverage up. Go buy 3 90% loans, residential versus 1 commercial, because if we get the same capital growth, you've got 3 times the equity, 3 times the wealth to then transfer into some cash flow. If you're 64 years old, how is me buying you a negatively geared residential property part of the plan? So even if you've got the capacity, it's not getting you to your goal. So then, cool, we need to buy something high yielding. And that could be little apartments in Cairns or house and granny flats or blocks of apartments or at the top of the food chain commercial properties. Yep. So it's matching up what you're achieving, what time frame do you want to do it in, and amalgamating that with your finance.
Yeah, this is what I find. A lot of people are struggling to understand that property investment or investing in property is a business and you cannot get emotional when it comes to it. And most of my clients, when they live locally in Sydney, for example, they want to purchase locally in Sydney as well. They want to have something that they can feel, touch, smell, whilst you're looking for property all across Australia. And me included, I've invested outside of Sydney as well, and I've seen massive growth, capital gains, as well as rental yield. Right? What would you say to these guys, or how do you break their limiting belief that they need to cross that line emotionally?
I try to use it with data, and I still get the same thing. I get commercial investors that only want to buy in Sydney, and then it's probably a little bit of a different argument. I can show them bang for buck, like the shopping centre I just bought in Brisbane for 3.1 mil. You're barely buying a shop in some blue chip areas, just one, and I'm getting 8. So you can show them bang for buck. I'm also getting a high yield. I'm getting 6%, whereas they're getting 4% in Sydney. But you just got to do it through data, because like most of the time it's just a misconception. They're like, oh no, Sydney's the best performer. And yep, it's been a really good performer in the last 7 years, but depends what time frame you choose it in. Like if you go 3 years ago, Sydney's not the best performer. Other areas like Brisbane have outperformed it. If you go 5 years, there's a different performer. If you go back 30 years, you know where the top performer is? Hobart's had on average 6.7% growth in the last 30 years because the starting point was smaller. And that's not even including cash flow. That's just capital growth. You could buy a house 30 years ago for $80,000 there, whereas in Sydney it was $250. Now that house is $650, $700, whereas the houses in Sydney are 1.2. So you can actually do better. Here's the secret. They actually all grow exactly the same. And this is sort of why we have cycles. They all have to grow between kind of 5 and 6.5%. Because if they don't, one area becomes more affordable and then that's the next boom location. So as an investor, you're trying to pick the market to the next cycle, the next 7 years. That's the hard thing to do, and that's why everyone's got misconception. They'll say previous 7 years is an indicator for the next 7 years. Other ones will say, no, that's had its time in the sun. Now it's this next region. But I just always try to buy to boring fundamentals. Population growth, days on market, supply and demand, migration to the area, vacancy rates, livability scores. Like that's the basis. And then after that, you can always argue. You can always argue a pro and a con for anything.
Yeah. What's your biggest challenge at the moment in your business?
The problems always just shift. So when I started, the problem was having enough time by myself to do things. So like being able to have sales calls, do social media, find the properties, do the due diligence report. So it was actually like my time was the hardest one. Then as you start growing, you start building a bit of a team, the hardest problem became finding enough deals to feed the mouths of your client. Because all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have to find 10 deals a month now. Now we're doing about 20 a month. That was the hardest one. So that problem was I fixed by hiring more acquisition staff. Got 5 acquisition staff. All they do is look around the country. And then personally, my problem starts shifting to people management. Now that I've got like quite a lot of staff, it's no longer I don't have anyone to do the due diligence reports. I don't have anyone to find the properties. It's now managing staff is the headache. So the problems just shift kind of as time goes on. The biggest problem at the moment, I would actually say, is probably still finding good quality assets. I don't want to run a business where I drop quality for the sake of making more money. Like it's just, yes, I can make more long-term money and do a bit more churn and burn, but being happy in myself, being like hand on heart, I'd buy this property if I was you, that kind of disappears. So there's ways to fix that. Do less deals and charge more, or try to hire more people and profit margins shrink a little bit. But it's a first world problem, that's for sure.
Were there properties that you bought for your clients that you thought, I could have bought that one?
Yeah, and I've bought some of them. So
you bought from them?
So the shopping centre and the cafe I both mentioned on this podcast, I actually sent to clients and they said no. The funny ones, the shopping centre I just bought, sent it to 2 clients. Both of them said no because the yield wasn't high enough. So like, we want a bit more yield. Then when I actually bought it and I told them that I bought it, they came back and said, you should have pushed me harder to buy this property. And I'm like, it's just FOMO now that I've got it. Like you had the opportunity, they got the fear, but they've got it. There's a rationale behind. They wanted a higher yield because they're trying to build a passive income. I don't have to personally chase yield. So I'm more about buying low risk assets and putting my money into stuff that I know is going to guarantee me a passive income for life. But the funny thing is, if I'd pushed them into it and then something had gone wrong with it, they would say, Steve, you pushed me into this property you shouldn't have. Whereas like I already know, like I've done a building pest report. There's a retaining wall I'll probably have to fix in the next 5 years, which costs 100, 150 grand. A client would see me as pushing them into that, being like, you shouldn't have done that. And this is this thing. It's always the fear of missing out, which is actually a driver of the property market as well.
Yep.
So you get that on an individual level and you get that on a mass level as well.
Yep. Where do you see commercial property market at the moment? Is it performing better than residential?
It's about the same. So it's always hard to answer this question because when you say commercial property market, the people kind of talk about resi and commercial like they're just one or the other. Commercial's huge. Commercial is industrial, retail, office, specialised is like cinemas and petrol stations and car wash stations and things like that. Then the location changes the type of asset. The size of the asset is different as well. But just generally for office space, it's had a bit of a hard time, like obviously reasons with COVID and things like that. Suburban retail has done really well. So CBD retail struggled because they've lost the foot traffic from the office. But suburban retail and industrial has had about 30% growth in the last kind of 3 years. So pretty on par with residential. I foresee probably another, again, this is just a prediction. You can't actually pick it. And if any buyer's agent or person says they've got a crystal ball and they can see the next 3 years, just run a mile. If they did, they'd be a billionaire living on a private island. So to have that long-term mindset of going, okay, is the properties going to be in more demand in 10 years' time, which will hopefully equate to capital growth. But I see in probably another 30% kind of capital growth coming in the next 3 years. Certain factors are going to increase that. So interest rates is a big one. If interest rates keep going up, then we're probably not going to see 30% capital growth. It'll probably kind of stay the same. If interest rates come down, we're probably actually going to see prices go up more than 30%. We'll probably see 50, 60%. I think we're probably not going to see any kind of interest rate changes for the next 2 or 3 years. And we're just going to get, basically inflation is going to be the growth factor. So if we're getting 6, 7% inflation, that's typically what you get as a rental increase as well. Get a little bit more in commercial as well because there's a lag. So it kind of got to catch up as well, and that's why we're seeing 10 to 15%. But the macro data has never been as strong. Vacancy rates are all-time low with industrial. Unemployment's at all-time low. CPI increases all-time high as well. So like everything on paper is really, really strong. That's also why we have high interest rates. If we didn't have high interest rate, the market goes through the roof and explodes, and we don't want a bubble. So high interest rates weirdly is a good thing for the market. It's an indicator to say, hey, we need to slow this market down. Everything's too strong. Same thing for residential as well. That's also why I think they're probably going to stay the same for the next couple 100%. Of years.
Now that you've built a strong, solid, successful business, what's next for you?
This is the sort of when you asked before about like what's the planning side. I want to not semi-retire, but I just want to probably reduce my hours a little bit more. At the moment, I kind of work 10 to 4 because I got a 12-month-old, and at 4 p.m. partner walks in.
12-month-old?
Yeah, got a 1-year-old, so she turned 1 a couple of weeks ago.
Wow, congratulations.
Partner walks in at 4 p.m. and hands it to me, so there's a laptop's got to close. That's the end of the day. I think I want to get back a bit more into hobbies and things like that. So like just pick up the guitar again, get back into surfing a little bit. And then I might even get back into engineering on like a feel-good level in regards to like work with a charity or something like that where I still get to use my brain with it, but it's not, the focus is not making money. It's a kind of a feel-good for myself. Giving back. But I've learned like when you retire as a young person, you can't sit on a beach. Like,
you can't really retire.
You got to do something constructive. That's the thing. I enjoy work, but not enough to ever work 12 hours a day. Like if I found whenever I fall in that gap, I start sitting there going, I can't be bothered. Love working 5 hours a day. Doing like a 10 till 3 day, perfect. So if I can keep doing that for the next like 3-4 days, kind of moving forward, pick up some hobbies, do some feel-good charity work, I think that's where I'm at. But life always throws curveballs, man. Like I said it before, 7 years ago, I did not expect having a buyer's agency, having books, talking to you. Like it's just, it takes on random curveballs.
Looking back, what was the lowest moment in your life?
Probably when I was with the other buyer's agency and I was making really, really good money. And as I mentioned before, I went through a divorce. So the relationship was kind of on the way out. And just being in that kind of lost state again where you're just like, why am I not happy? You're like my partner was a great person. Like there's nothing wrong with the relationship. It was like across the board, it was fairly good. But why was I working, living the dream, had a passive income, earning really good money, on paper had a great relationship, but still feeling sad?
There's something missing.
Yeah, it's just still feeling sad of like, what is missing here? And like I said, that was the fuck it moment of like, all right, let's have a crack. Let's go out, do my own thing, move overseas, travel around. That combined with my mum being sick as well, it was just a bit of a rough 2-3 years. But you sort of need that to have the good moments as well.
Yeah.
Like I'm a firm believer of you actually can't be happy all the time, because if you're happy all the time, that's your data point.
Yeah.
So to be really happy, you got to be elated. So you actually need up and downs, and that's also why enjoy is the wrong word, but why I enjoy traveling to like third world countries, because you always get back and feel really privileged and happy of like I'm lucky here. I've got a really good life, and that's part of it. Like I live on the Northern Beaches, one of the most stunning locations in the whole world. Northern Beaches has the highest rate of depression in Sydney. And it's the most wealthy and prettiest spot. And why is that? And I think that's because their data points there, they kind of sit there looking out at the ocean, the beauty, being like, why aren't I happy? Whereas if you kind of come from a lower income, you can look forward and be like, oh, I want to get that next goal. And this is probably the premise of your question as well. Like what's next is you have to have some goal. whether it be fitness, life, love, work. And that's I suppose that's life.
Are you happy?
I'm very happy at the moment. But like I said, happiness dwindles. You can't stay happy for long. And that's where I'm finding like, when you probably have this in your business as well, where business is going really well and it's like you got 3-4 months where it's all just firing, you're making good money. You find that the happiness kind of dies off a little bit. Like, oh, why am I happy now? Like, I'll tell you this. So like, when I started buying properties, I think like probably after number 6, the first few properties, every time I bought another property portfolio, you get like that boost of, oh, how good's this? I feel really good. I've grown the portfolio. After like 6 or 7, my enjoyment went down every single time.
Diminishing return.
I'd buy the property and be like, oh, bloody hell, I got another property I got to look after now. So I was getting wealthier, but getting more miserable with it as well. The same thing happens in like business. I found like when you make your first $10,000, you're like, this is unreal, I made 10,000. Then the goal becomes 100 grand. You're like, I want to make 100 grand this year. And then you make that. And then it's almost like an exponential scale. Then the next year it's like 200 grand, then it's 500 grand, then it's $1 million. And it's actually an unattainable thing because it keeps going up exponentially.
Yeah.
So that's why I always find you got to do a bit of a reset, reassess and try to change things up a bit. But I'm still fairly fresh in my business, so it's still exciting. Like we've hired, like I said, like 18 people in 3 years. So it's like every few months minimum we're hiring 1 or 2 people.
Yep.
So that's still exciting. We're still like last week we did Hamilton Island all together, which is a really fun week. So I'm still enjoying all that side of it. But as it becomes more corporate, then I think that's where you got to make changes. And we actually spoke about this when we went out a team getaway. I said to everyone, I said, do we want to actually keep growing? Or should we just increase profit margins, i.e. increase prices, and I can pass that on to you guys, because growing doesn't actually mean people get happier. Like it can actually just mean more problems. So I think getting your people right and having that kind of family culture is a big thing as well.
100%. Now that you have a kid, did your perspective change before you have a kid to now that you're a father?
It means I don't swear as much. No. I enjoy the slowing down nature of it. So like I'm not ADD, but I'm basically that personality of like, I have to do everything 100%. I can't half-ass anything. It slows it down. Like I mentioned, partner brings in the kid at 4 p.m, hands it to me. It's sit on the floor playing with blocks and like playing the xylophone this morning and stuff like that for an hour. Like it actually chills you out. Like you go sit on the beach and that, whereas normally you'd be on your phone, like doing text, and oh, what can I do? Like I got bored after I did the commercial book, and anytime I had 2 hours spare, I'm like, I'll write another book, and you'd start like writing. Whereas in hindsight, you probably should have just been like, cool, I'm going to go for a swim and relax.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the nature of it's just slowed me down. There's 6 hours a day I just get to chill, be on a simple level with my child and enjoy that part.
I reckon that's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of business owners is how to switch off, especially if they're working for themselves, no partners, and just go 24/7.
I think I would have really struggled if I had a daughter and had started my business now. I don't think it'd be anywhere near where it is now. Because like I mentioned, when I was in the UK, I was doing like 4 a.m. till 7 p.m. Like that would just be a no-go. Yeah. So I'd kind of be limited. So I think it would have slowed the growth of the business down quite a lot. Probably might even stopped it. Like you might have been like, this is not worth it, or it's too stressful trying to jam it into like a 6-hour day. So I do see kids can kind of hold that back. A lot of businesses I see though, they say they're doing it for the kids. The kids don't care. They're doing it so they feel financial security, which their kid will hopefully enjoy in the future. But most kids want to see their dad. Like that's the big. They don't care whether you earn 50 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand. So it's getting that balance. But part of investing, and what I tell my clients is, it gives you that privilege to do that. You can build a passive income, or even one of my light bulb moments actually was I made $1 million on a property. And my accountant actually said, he's like, do you want me to sell it and then disperse it to you in 100 grand increments over the next 10 years? It's like 100 grand passive income. And I kind of I never thought about equity that way. I either thought of equity as net wealth and passive income as lifestyle money. Mm-hmm. But selling a property being like, I don't have to work for 10 years and I get 100 grand per year. Like that was a bit of a light bulb moment as well. I'm just like, if I can get 2 or 3 of these, I can just sell up and be done. Obviously, if you can hold them, then you have more future wealth. But that was sort of a different way of looking at property, which I don't think most people do. look at equity as lifestyle and years you get back from not working, and it makes it a bit more enjoyable.
But it would take time for you to build that portfolio. It's not an overnight success.
It's not, but overnight success don't make you happy anyway. And you know this money, like people get caught up in the whole Insta Facebook world and stuff. No one is wealthy short term. Like every time you see they've done like 2 years and they're this wealthy. No, there's a lot of back history. If it was that easy, everyone would be wealthy. So if you have that long-term mindset, you'll be right. But you got to do the hard work, otherwise you don't enjoy it. Like how many high net worth individuals do you work with where they're miserable and their parents gave them $5 million to get started? Like you have to have done the work, otherwise you don't get the feedback.
I asked a very high net worth friend of mine, how much do you want to earn? And what he answered was, just a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I've heard that on the podcast. There's a book I got to read. I got recommended the other day. I can't remember the name of it. But it was about a guy who made $100 million and the end result was he wished he stopped at 5 million. So, but again, you don't know. That's the thing. You need a goal. The goal doesn't have to be financial.
Yep.
It can be financial at the start because we all know you get like a feel good emotion from making money. After that starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller, so you actually have to do something else. Where I think it becomes a problem with the high net worth is where it takes away other aspects of their life, where they're making more money but they're sacrificing relationships. And this is why there's stats to show high net worth individuals have a higher rate of divorce because they're not present. So, but again, I've got clients that are high net worth and they love making money. You can see their eyes light up when they make money. Other ones that are just really stressed because they've taken on debt and they're just trying to kind of graft and graft and graft. So I think the secret is just look at yourself in the mirror and just go, what do actually makes me happy, and then go from there, which I've heard you've asked a few people on podcasts what makes them happy, and they kind of sit there. I think you got asked it on one of yours as well, and you were just like, oh, lots of things. I enjoy coffee.
Exactly. Basically just being grateful for what you have at the moment. Yeah, being content. Right, Steve, thank you very much again for your time. That was insightful, and we learned a lot about properties.
Hopefully.
Anyway, thank you again.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it, mate.